Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Emily, and on this channel, I talk about homeschooling, mom life, and faith and culture. Today's video, I'm going to talk about what if you're a parent and you really want to homeschool, but you just don't have the resources or you're not able to do it yet. How can you have your kid in the public school system and still feel like you're involved and that your child is aware of what's going on and that you, as a parent, are directing them in their education and their faith? There's a lot of families where they can't homeschool for whatever reasons. Maybe you're a single mom and you're holding down two jobs and you're just not able to do that. Or maybe you're praying about it and making steps towards getting to there, but you just can't do it right now. I'm going to talk about the number one thing that all parents need to do and 3 issues that are basically at the forefront of culture and society and are now being pushed through the school system. These are not things I want to scare parents about, but these are rather issues that as a parent, you must understand and be in front of so that you can prepare your child for when they are up against them, because there are issues that are not going to go away and they're going to get progressively worse. So the number one thing that all parents need to do, and this is going to be something that's going to be hard for some parents who work, is you have to be involved. And what I mean by involvement, it's not the PTA president or being in charge of the school's fundraising efforts or reading to kids in the classroom. Those are all really wonderful things, but they don't really touch on the things that are affecting students and causing mass amounts of young adults to enter college and renounce their faith. You need to be involved in getting to know the school board. The school board is responsible for making curriculum decisions. So what this means is that you're going to have to attend meetings, and not just meetings that are like, meetings where you vote for someone. You need to be able to attend every meeting. You need to get in front of what's being taught. You need to know what's coming down the pipeline. You need to be vocal about the decisions that are being made. It's not enough for just you. You also need to get other parents involved. All of these things impact all of our children. And if you don't have kids in public school because you homeschool, you can still be involved because your tax dollars are still funding these schools. You are a member of the community. Most of the decisions that are impacting our children are made in rooms where we're not a part of. And schools would have you think that you have no place in saying what your kids are being taught and choosing what they're being taught. But you have all the power. You have the power by removing your child. You have the power by writing letters. You have the power by getting other parents involved. So you need to remember that in order for your kid to get out of the system, if you're choosing to keep your kids enrolled through 12th grade, you have to be involved. You have to know what's being taught so that you can combat it not only with truth, but with the truth of the Word of God. You don't want to leave your kids alone in this. A lot of the things that our children are being exposed to have been happening progressively over the course of the last 30 years, which means that a lot of us were in school when these things started to take shape. So you can't just sit there and think, well, if we talk about it at the dinner table, that's enough. You have to be involved. You need to get other parents involved, and you got to be at these meetings, speaking your voice and making it heard. Things change. You can change the course of stuff if you are smart and courageous enough to do the work. So the first topic I want to address is the 1619 Project. It is a long-form journalism piece that's been developed into a curriculum that is now taught in public schools all over the country. Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is the original author of this, aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the forefront and very center of the United States national narrative. Now, there's nothing wrong with promoting anyone's contributions, whether it's Black Americans, Asian Americans, or any person of color. The issue is that they don't stop at highlighting the contributions of people. They are promoting a disdain for some while then pushing someone else above. So the 1619 Project teaches that American history was founded solely to continue slavery. The sole basis of this particular curriculum is to teach your kid a false narrative that a certain group is inherently racist, that everything in America is racist, and that we must destroy all those things and start over. So the 1619 Project is not foundationally necessary for your children to have a knowledge of early American history or the reasons why America was founded in 1776, even though they teach that it was founded in 1619 based on slavery. There is an agenda at work here by the people who have written this. And it is not an agenda to teach your kids truth in history. It is an agenda to make them think a certain way for a certain purpose. Now you may be wondering, well, how do I recognize this? How am I going to go to my school board and know that this is what's being put in place? You're going to want to look for selected readings, poetries, essays, anthologies, and lessons that focus on this narrative that all white people are inherently racist. Slavery was a fundamental cause for America. It's what founded our nation. Promoting it was something that was essential to the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers had slaves. Nobody denies this. But to say that this was the reason why America was created should make a parent think there's something else going on. So the 1619 Project is one component of reshaping American history. Another thing that we're going to look at very briefly, that's probably something you're more familiar with, is the idea of critical race theory. Critical race theory is the idea that America is so racist and so wrong because it was founded on slavery that it cannot be fixed and it must be destroyed. In this framework of critical race theory, which I'm also going to refer to as CRT, the idea that institutions must be destroyed, they must be torn down, is absolutely fundamental. Anything that would cause another person and who is part of the oppressed class to feel pain needs to be destroyed. Therefore, you're going to see historical statues being torn down. You're going to see the renaming of schools. You're going to see founding fathers and people in history that had notable contributions to good things, but, obviously had some areas and beliefs that were fundamentally wrong. Not only are we going to just say those are wrong, this was right, we're going to basically get rid of all of that and say everything is wrong. Whiteness is the greatest contributing factor to the inequities of all non-white people. Now, the 1619 Project is going to show you all these writings and things that are fundamental in beginning this ideology. Critical race theory is going to be the catalyst that makes people feel disadvantaged, that makes them feel like the world is against them, and then it's also going to take these other people and shift the blame to them. So what we need to be aware of is that critical race theory is not just something that's being taught in our schools. It's something your kids are seeing in the media at large. Their favorite sports stars and their favorite musicians and all the things that are part of their culture, they're also promoting the ideas of CRT. Proponents of critical race theory reject the notion that there's ever any individual choice in how a person turns out, and they're merely just victims of somebody else's behaviors, somebody else's attitudes and decisions. So white people are unaware that they are inherently racist. Under CRT, we are basically told that we need to do the work. We need to find ways to disavow our whiteness, ways to make us no longer racist. We now need to achieve anti-racism, and that's achieved solely by reading certain books by certain authors, saying that you are a certain type of person, and then children are then taught to hate certain types of people because they're disenfranchised, there's disparities, and there's inequities. Critical race theory has no place in our public schools. So when you see these things happening, you see these ideas being mentioned, you have to address them. It inhibits Unity that could be fostered by segregating students into groups based on color, race, and ethnicity. Advocates of CRT will assign levels of privilege. So you are basically segregating people, just like what they're advocating against, based on color, which is the very definition of racism, to be judged based on your skin color. And then you're going to further create animosity into the people who are apparently the oppressors. And then the people who are oppressed are going to feel the sense of entitlement because they're oppressed. Now, whether they're oppressed because they're actually experiencing inequity and disparity it's a very subjective thing. Proponents of critical race theory will say that in all forms of government, and even in schools, there's systemic injustice, and that we have to fight against it. This is very, very destructive to your child. It is a false sense of unity has happened because you cannot have unity if you don't even understand what unity is. Unity is the idea and notion that you have a common belief that you share that unites us. And if you believe that someone is evil based on skin color, that, unbeknownst to them, they're working to oppress you, you're not going to feel unified to them. And if you're the person who's supposedly the oppressor, you're not going to feel any unity because this person thinks you're racist. We are trying to cause animosity within the schools, and there's only one reason why, and it is basically to dismantle the entire system and structures of America. So how do you recognize this? How do you know if your school is openly embracing this ideology? Well, very simply, you're going to see a promotion and acceptance of the Black Lives Matter organization, as well as the phrase Black Lives Matter. Now, I am absolutely fundamentally in agreement that Black Lives Matter. Any person who would actually say that they don't matter is absolutely insane. But I will say to you, if you are a Christian and you support the organization, you have to be aware that before they took this down off their website, they also advocated for the dismantling of the nuclear family, and they are openly anti-God. And as a Christian parent, if your child is in the public school system, you should never, ever align with any organization that fundamentally seeks to rob you of your role as a child's parent and teacher, first and foremost, and any organization that says God is not real, there's no purpose for him, that basically teaches your child to be an anti-God hater. Other ways of recognizing critical race theory in your public school is that students are often led through exercises in as young as second grade to identify and state their whiteness and their inherent privileges. They are having to list all the things that make them privileged and all the things that make other people unprivileged based on the color of their skin. I read about a school in Cupertino where this was an actual assignment in a math class, and thankfully a parent saw this and they got the media involved, and this was removed from the school. You have power to do this, and you should take your power as a parent and actively advocate against this. Finally, you're going to see a lot of discussion centering around the terms like justice, racism, systemic racism, inequity, and they often redefine these terms to sort of create this new context. And so words that you and I are familiar with and learned about no longer have the same meaning in this new ideology of CRT. If you're interested in learning more about CRT, I'll link below in the description some more resources for you to familiarize yourself with. But just like the 1619 Project, which feeds into the idea of critical race theory, these are ideologies that you as a parent need to educate yourself on so that when it does pop up, and it will pop up into your school because schools were designed for this sort of mass indoctrination, you'll be prepared to take it to your school board and actively fight against it. The last thing I want to discuss with you that you need to be aware of is this idea of social emotional learning. And it sounds really great, social emotional learning. Oh, this is wonderful. They're going to take my whole child into account when we're teaching, but it has nothing to do with that. Before I left teaching, this was just on the forefront of most of my professional development. It really concerned me as I was learning about it because I was thinking, this is not what I'm trained as an educator to do. And the idea that I need to instigate this into my classroom, that I need to put this into the minds of my students really made me uncomfortable. So social emotional learning is descendant of the self-esteem movement, and it focuses on student attributes, mindsets, values, and behaviors, but not academic content knowledge or mastery. We're not looking at, are the students learning all the things they need to be learning in their core curriculum. The teachers are basically tasked with assessing their students' emotional and social development. This is not a task that we are trained for. This is accomplished through different sorts of questionnaires, activities, and exercises. Now, what we're not really sure of is why are teachers assessing our students? Why do they need to be assessing our students? What is being done with this information? The SEL curricula in assessments also are touching on private and personal matters, such as students' identities, including gender, sexual identity, the way they think about things, their inherent ideas, basically their worldview. So anything that you are doing as a parent is now being looked at under the guise that the school, as a social administration, a social welfare administration, they need to collect this data on your kids. They still have not told parents what they're using it for. And often these private and sensitive matters that schools are assessing children on do not require parent consent. Social emotional learning takes away time from teachers teaching actual content knowledge, encouraging schools to assert parental responsibility and education of their own children. So in essence, the schools are teaching your kids what they need to know under the assumption that, well, some kids aren't actually learning these sorts of things at home. So it's our job as the school to teach the whole child. So SEL curriculum assessments touch on private and sensitive matter. Often their aim and goal is to basically indoctrinate your child into a certain pattern of thinking. There are parents who don't teach their children about anything. So it's our job. It is the society's job and teach everybody the same thing, regardless of what kind of religious beliefs you have at home, regardless if you're the parent and you want to teach your own child. There is no parental consent in any of this. And they're usurping your role as a parent to determine when your child is taught something, how they're taught something. And it's very easily put into the curriculum. For little kids, it could be story time learning about gender confusion. Social emotional learning does not fall under HIPAA. So there's no privacy in the assessments that are being used on your children. And these assessments can follow your child through the course of K through 12 and even beyond into college. If your child is categorized unfavorably in these assessments, maybe they're argumentative or they are more independent or they don't fall in line with groupthink because, God forbid, they think for themselves. Those things will be tagged and they will follow your student. When your student then is, applying to college, it might come back up. This is a data mining of your students, and you have no say in any of this. This is very dangerous, and the fact that parents cannot opt out of this, that parents cannot consent to this, and that there is no privacy or protection for students should be of the utmost concern for your child's privacy. So you may be thinking, this is really, really terrifying. I don't even know where to get started. How do I know if this is happening in my kid's school? So there's a couple buzzwords you need to be familiar with. The word mindfulness. In this regard, teachers are basically using a variety of methods from Buddhist resources to actively engage students' minds beyond teaching them how to think critically, creatively, or even preparing them for how to study for tests. It has nothing to do with academic. It has everything to do with the student's mind. And that is not something that teachers are actively trained to teach. Another word you may see is the whole child. And this is not addressing your student as an academic learner, but it's talking about the character of your student, the ethics that the student brings forth into the classroom. It's incorporating psychological insights and group dynamics under the guise of collaboration. And this is preparing students for a collectivist mentality. Where else do we see collectivist mentalities? In ideologies such as communism. The idea and notion of individual thoughts and individual work no longer valid and something that we need to do away with. We're now putting kids together into group projects and group collaborative thinking. Students are no longer an individual person. They're just a collective of bodies. And a parent should be concerned with a school that's tasked to teach their individual learner, no longer teaching their individual learner and putting children into groups based on their personal worldview, their ethics, how they approach problem solving. I can think of another group in history that divided people up. Can you? Schools are now seen as social service agencies. They have the power to mine this data on your child, and then they have the power to use it against you as a parent. If they don't like what you're teaching your child, and they don't think it conforms to their creation of a safe environment, they can get the authorities involved, and your child can be removed. Schools are now believing that it is their purpose to provide health care for your children in terms of counseling and teaching your kids about their bodies and their sexual preferences. This is not things that any school or any teacher should have any say. This is your job as a parent. And they have taken the unfortunate circumstances of some parents who can't teach their kids about this, and they are now using it across the board and applying it to all students and saying that the school is the parent, you are not. When Hillary Clinton said it takes a village to raise a child, this is what they meant. So how do you recognize if this is happening in your school? The first thing you're probably going to see is you're going to see a letter. The letter is not going to tell you that, hey, you have an option to let your kid be a part of this. It's going to tell you, this is what we're teaching. You're going to see these buzzwords of mindfulness and whole child and safe environment and culture, stereotypes, perspective, many different types of family. You're going to see these words incorporated into this letter, and there will be no opt-out. It should raise red flags for you as a parent that I need to get involved. I need to go to the board. I need to write letters. I need to tell other parents about these things. So I've talked about 3 issues that are actively happening in our schools, but they're now really just in full force. I do want to read a letter to you that I came upon just this past week that has just gone national. This is a letter from a concerned parent like you. His child attends a private school, so it's not just in public schools. This is part of a private school, and I want you to just pay attention to what he's saying and that he's basically taking action as a parent, which is what you can do. So Andrew Gutman is a parent of a student who attends this private school in New York City called Brierley. Brierley is a $54,000 a year private girls' school. And I have to say, this man is a hero, and it's very encouraging to see a parent. I don't know if he's a Christian or not. I don't know if he's a conservative or a Democrat, but he is seeing this for what it is, and he's addressing it. Dear fellow Brierley parents, our family recently made the decision not to re-enroll our daughter at Brierley for the 2021-2022 school year. She has been at Brierley for 7 years, beginning in kindergarten. In short, we no longer believe that Brierley's administration and board of trustees have our children's best interests at heart. Moreover, we no longer have confidence that our daughter will receive the quality of education necessary to further her development into a critically thinking, responsible, enlightened, and civic-minded adult. I write to you as a fellow parent to share our reasons for leaving the Brierley community, but also urge you to act before the damage to the school, to its community, and to your own child's education is irreparable. It cannot be stated enough that Brierley's obsession with race must stop. It should be abundantly clear to any thinking parent that Brierley has completely lost its way. The administration and board of trustees have displayed a cowardly and appalling lack of leadership by appeasing to an anti-intellectual, illiberal mob and then allowing the school to be captured by that same mob. What follows are my own personal views on Brierley's anti-racism initiatives, but these are also just a handful of the criticism that I know other parents have expressed. I object to the view that I should be judged by the color of my skin. I cannot tolerate a school that not only judges my daughter by the color of her skin, but encourages and instructs her to prejudge others by theirs. By viewing every element of education, every aspect of history, and every facet of society through the lens of skin color and race, we are desecrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and utterly violating the movement for which civil rights leaders believed, fought, and died. I object to the charge of systemic racism in this country and at our school. Systemic racism, properly understood, is segregated schools and separate lunch counters. It is the interning of Japanese and the exterminating of Jews. We have not had systemic racism against blacks in this country since the civil rights reform of the 1960s, a period of more than 50 years. Note that the 1619 Project, critical race theory, would have you think otherwise. To state otherwise is a flat-out misinterpretation of our country's history and adds no understanding to any of today's societal issues. If anything, long-withstanding and widespread policies such as affirmative action point in precisely the opposite direction. I object to a definition of systemic racism apparently supported by Brierley, that any educational, professional, or societal outcome where blacks are underrepresented is prima facie evidence of the affirmation systemic racism of or white supremacy and oppression. Facile and unsupported beliefs such as these are the polar opposite to the intellectual and scientific truth for which Brierley claims to stand. Furthermore, I call BS on Brierley's oft-stated assertion that the school welcomes and encourages the truly different and uncomfortable conversations regarding race and the roots of racial discrepancies. Also note that if your student is in public school and they speak against CRT and 1619 and any of the ideas that are being promulgated, they will be shut down and told that they're racist. I object to the idea that blacks are unable to succeed in this country without aid from government or from whites. Brierley, by adopting critical race theory, is advocating the abhorrent viewpoint that blacks should forever be regarded as helpless victims and are incapable of success regardless of their skills, talents, or hard work. What Brierley is teaching our children is precisely the true and correct definition of racism. Now, this is interesting that he says this because this is a definition of racism that I and many of you grew up with. But now our students are being taught that that no longer is the definition, that there's new definition and there's nothing you can do to actually be not racist. You can vow to be anti-racist if you read the books, often written by white people, I guess, who are disavowing their whiteness, but you have to read the books and you have to do the work. That's the only way you can be anti-racist. I object to mandatory anti-racism training for parents. These sessions in both their content and delivery are so sophomoric and simplistic, so unsophisticated and inane that I would be embarrassed if they were taught to Brierley kindergartners, and they are an insult to parents unbecoming of any educational institution, let alone one of Brierley's caliber. He goes on. It's a very long letter that I will link to in the description, but I want to end it with this one last thing. I object to the gutting of the history, civics, and classical literature curriculums. I object to the censorship of books that have been taught for generations because they contain dated language that's potentially offensive to the thin-skinned and hypersensitive. Any parent with eyes open can foresee these inevitabilities should anti-racism initiatives be allowed to persist. I just want to encourage you that as a parent, if your child is in public school, you need to be aware of what's going on, but you also need to be vocal. You need to educate yourself and your child about how to identify this and to stand up for what they believe. It's very important that parents, especially Christian parents, train up their child for a world beyond education, and that we recognize as parents that there is a push to control what your children are thinking, to control what they're learning, but that you ultimately have the power. You have the power to address this to your school board. You have the power to share this with other parents. And you have the power to pull your child from this system. If you liked today's video, hit subscribe and share below with me one of the reasons you might be a homeschooling parent, or if you're still have a child in the public school, can you share below what concerns you? I hope you guys have a blessed day.